Well, we love heroes. We love them in all shapes and sizes. We love heroes, whether they're fictitious or whether they're real-life heroes. And not only do we love heroes, but we love the stories that come along with the hero. And like I said, we don't care if it's a real-life hero or, a hero out of the movies or a hero out of literature. We just are a sap for a great hero story. There's names like Frodo Baggins, Lord of the Rings, anybody, come on now. Mordor, Mount Doom, Gandalf. Don't offer me the ring, Frodo, right? And some of you are like, what? It's a great, great thing. You need to watch it. There's William Wallace, Braveheart, guys, come on. Rah, freedom, let's go. And let's, all that. Major Scott McCoy. No? It's like, who? Okay. I thought you were real. Delta Force, Chuck Norris, 19... Come on! Chuck Norris, man, you can't kill him. I can remember my dad and my uncle would make me watch that movie over and over again. It's like they're going to free the hostages every single time. We're going to kick those people, it's going to be incredible. Aaron Brockovich, Charlie's Angels, Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, it just goes on and on and on and on. We love heroes and we love the stories. We love it on social media when a little bitty video clip comes up of random strangers who see a car submerged in floodwaters and they jump in and they save the family. We love stories of where the firefighter goes into the burning building and they save, one person, two people. They save an entire family. We love stories from the battlefield of soldiers who are heroes. We just love heroes and we love their stories because I think ultimately it's because it always moves us emotionally. And it challenges us. It inspires us to be more and to be better and to aspire to be perhaps a hero ourselves because I think the thumbprint of God on every single person in this room and all of you that are watching online, I think the thumbprint of God on our lives is that there is just something innately within us that has always aspired to being a hero. Let me ask you a question. This is an all skate, all vote. How many of y'all remember as a kid pretending to be a hero of some shape, form, or fashion? Let's just see it, right? Some of you are too cool for school. That's okay. But we know you. We know what normalcy is. Maybe you're not normal. It's quite possible. But for most of us, we grew up and we pretended to be here. I can remember from the earliest age. I was perhaps the greatest reenactment of He-Man, Master of the Universe there has ever been. Had my sword, raised it up by the power of Grayskull. I defended the secrets of Castle Grayskull against the wilds of Skeletor more times than I could tell you about. I picked up boulders. I saved Eternia. It was crazy. It was awesome. I was G.I. Joe. I was fighting against Cobra Khan. I had my gun. Even if I didn't have like a fake gun, I would, just carry around an imaginary gun. I mean, it was wild. And then, I also, that was, fantasy, but I had some real life people that I pretended to be. There was a guy who played for the Atlanta Braves back in the day when nobody cared about the Atlanta Braves. He wore number 3. His name was Dale Murphy. And Dale Murphy was like one of my just baseball heroes. Some of you are like, who? I know. That's when I loved the Atlanta Braves when nobody loved the Atlanta Braves. And I would pretend being in Game 7 of the World Series because back then that was the only way the Braves were getting to the World Series was in my backyard. And I was Dale Murphy, and the bases were loaded, and we were down by 3 in the bottom of the 9th, and it was the full count, and boom, there it is, grand slam. Chuck Tanner, the manager over there, he's just clapping. Everybody's coming out to greet. It was like, awesome. And then, I think this is also completely normal. With all my heroes, I also, from time to time, I can remember, somewhere around 4 or 5 years old, I would dress up, put a suit on, had my briefcase because I asked for one for Christmas one year, and I would pretend to argue cases before the Supreme Court, like landmark cases. And it was just, I had my legal pads, and I don't know what I had written on there, but that's completely normal. And don't you mess with my childhood. I have reconciled it all together. But you had your own shape, form of a hero that you pretended to be because I think somewhere on the inside of us when we were children, we were just born wanting to be a hero. But somewhere along the way, as we grew into adulthood, now we hear more about villains than heroes. And it seems as though we're consumed with villains close to home and far away, and we don't talk about heroes that much anymore, but perhaps we should. Maybe this is the time that we should talk about heroes more than any other time because maybe this is the time that we need more heroes than ever before. And so we love heroes, we love their stories, and with that in mind, I think there's an important question that I think we already know the answer to. We may have never put verbiage to it or really thought about it to, write something down, because why would we? We don't have time to think about these kinds of things. But I think this is a great question to consider as we launch into this series. What makes a hero a hero? Because if you watch, movies and you read literature, matter of fact, there is a whole psychology to this. You can read psychology articles. You can read just entire studies about people and what they think makes up a hero, both in the world of fiction and both in real life. And when you put everything together, basically, this is what you can deduce, that this is what makes a hero. There's usually a certain set of circumstances, right? There's a crisis. There's something that's happened. There's something that needs to happen. The bottom has fallen out. There's a bad time in the land, right? There's a certain set of circumstances, because usually heroes are a product of their time. There's a certain set of circumstances. There's a crisis that the hero is born into, comes of age in, and then there's conviction that begins to well up inside the hero. And he or she begins to believe that something needs to be done, that this is not right, this is an injustice, something needs to change. And so there's this conviction that begins to take place, and the hero begins to process internally. Then there is an act of courage. They begin to act courageously based on this conviction, based on this set of circumstances that they find themselves in. We find that typically they're skilled. They're usually skilled in one thing or the other that gives them a unique advantage over the opposition, over the enemy, over the forces of evil that they're about to face. They're skilled, they're courageous. They, most of the time, not always, have a sense of destiny, like I was born for this, this is my time. I was created for this. No one else can, only I can do this. There's a sense of destiny. Normally, heroes, at some point, they fight wounded. Right? They get either, stabbed, but they don't die, or they get shot and they don't die, or they lose one of their best friends, or something dark happened in their past. They've got ghosts of their past they're trying to overcome, but they fight wounded, whether physically, emotionally, spiritually, they just fight wounded. They act sacrificially. They're willing to lay down their lives for the sake of somebody else, for the good, the overall good, and for the good of others. And then they are change agents. Things change because a hero shows up, acts with courage, confronts what needs to be confronted, speaks up when no one else speaks up, stands up when no one else stands up. And because of it, things get better. People get better. That's what makes a hero a hero. You find this in literature. You watch this on news reports about heroes, and you're going to find most of those things, some of those things, maybe all of those things from time to time are present in the making of a hero. So, with that question, we go to another question, which I think most of us could describe to some shape, form, or fashion, but taking all of that and then asking the question, well, what is a hero? We know what makes a hero, but what is a hero? And here's a definition that I wrote down. You may have a better one, that's okay. But a hero is an ordinary person who finds themselves in extraordinarily difficult circumstances and responds in an extraordinarily noble way. That's a hero. They're an ordinary person in a set of extraordinary circumstances, and they respond in extraordinary ways. That's a hero. That's a hero in the world of fiction. That's a hero in the real world. It is a common person in an uncommon circumstance, and they respond in an uncommonly noble way. That's a hero. That's what a hero is. But I think the most important question we could ask and answer for all of us, for the sake of knowing who we are and how we are, and knowing a little bit about how we think, because I'm one of you and you're one of me, here's something I want us to think about. It's what a hero isn't. What a hero isn't. Well, here's the good news. And we don't always think about it, and we don't really believe it, because we stopped really aspiring to being a hero, and we stopped really thinking about heroic stories as we get older, because we get busy and we have kids, and we just don't think about it anymore. But a hero isn't perfect. That's what a hero isn't. A hero isn't perfect, and that's good news for you, and that's good news for me, because that means that you can be qualified to be a hero, and I can be qualified to be a hero, because a hero is not required to be perfect. A hero is a common person in an uncommon set of circumstances that responds in an uncommon way. Because I know you and I know me that when we think about heroes, we rarely think about people like us. We rarely think about people like us. We think about people who aren't like us. We think about people who are better than us. We think about people who have more than we do, that's seen more than we do. We just think about people who are different than we are because we just don't really think of ourselves as a potential, possible hero. We don't think of people like ourselves when we think about heroes. That's why I want to do this series over the next 3 weeks about a hero whose name is Elijah, perhaps one of the greatest heroes in all of the Old Testament Jewish scriptures. A man who is talked about by both Jesus, our Savior, in the New Testament, and also by his half-brother James in the New Testament. And when James, the half-brother of Jesus, talks about Elijah, who is a person of history, not fable, not legend, but a man of history, that Jesus verified his historicity, that Jesus spoke of the fact that Elijah was a real man who lived at a real time in history, and that he did a certain set of extraordinary things which now we remember him for. But when James spoke of Elijah, here's what James said about Elijah. He says that he was a man just like us. That Elijah was a man just like us. He's not superhuman. He's just like us. He's not fictional. He's not supernatural. He's a man just like us. And he lived his life as a hero. And I think in studying the life of Elijah, we're going to find that a hero doesn't always look like we think a hero looks. And a hero doesn't always respond the way we think a hero responds. And so to understand Elijah, let me tell you just a brief moment of history, because if heroes are a product of their time, it's really important for us to understand the history in which Elijah stepped into. Elijah stepped into a period of history where there was a northern kingdom of Israel and a southern kingdom of Judah. The first king of Israel had been a man by the name of Saul, who was crowned to be king around 1050 BC. About 40 years later, he was succeeded by a man you've probably heard about, King David. King David was anointed to be king and became king, rather, in 1010 BC. He died in 970. And in 970 BC, Solomon became the king over all the kingdom. But when Solomon died at around 930 BC, something happened. When Solomon died and his son took over, there was a civil war. And the unified kingdom became 2 kingdoms. And they split between north and south. 10 kingdoms went north, 2 kingdoms stayed south. The northern kingdom was called Israel, the southern kingdom was called Judah. So it was a day of political division, religious division, family division, philosophical division. It was a day where there was a lot of animosity in the land, where there was a lot of uncertainty in the land, where there was a lot of fear in the land, kind of like today. If you listen to the news, watch the news, read the newspapers, and it seems as though the world is hanging by a thread, and it seems as though that all people's attention are over there because the world could end over there, but we can't look over there too long because there's a place over here that the world could end there, and there's just really bad people all over the place, and it's just chaotic, and nobody can predict what's going to happen from day to day, and it just seems like the world's spiraling under control, and nobody knows, and it felt like that when Elijah stepped onto the scene. In the days when the kingdom had been split. And there was a northern kingdom that was consistently bad in leadership, one bad king after the other. In the southern kingdom, it was up and down, a good king followed by a bad king, followed by a good king, followed by 2 bad kings, followed by a bad king. But in the northern kingdom, they struggled with staying loyal to God. In the northern kingdom, they struggled with idolatry and wickedness and sin and all the things that God had warned them against. And so that's where Elijah is going to show up. But before we do, let me just give you a little glimpse of the kings of the northern kingdom. It started with a man by the name of Jeroboam who started a priesthood for pagan gods, a bad deal, lots of wickedness in the land. His son Nadab took over, but he only reigned probably for a couple of years, and then Baasha assassinated Nadab and took over, because when you're the assassin, you get to be king. And so Baasha took over as king, and then Elah succeeded him, and then Zimri assassinated Elah, and then after Zimri came Omri. And speaking of Omri, it says that none of the other kings had been as evil as Omri, that he was the most wicked king of the northern kingdom that there had ever been at this point. And there had been a lot of wickedness, a lot of bloodshed, a lot of idolatry, a lot of immorality. It was just bad. It was just bad. And he was the worst of all. But then he was succeeded by his son, Ahab, who it says of Ahab that he looked upon the wickedness of the past as just a light thing. That means that Ahab is going to outdo all of those who came before him in terms of wickedness. Ahab married a woman perhaps that you've heard of that I guarantee you didn't name your daughter after, hopefully. Her name was Jezebel, and if you're here and you did name your daughter Jezebel, God bless you, all right? We're going to have a hard time with the rest of this message. But he married Jezebel because she was the daughter of the king of Sidon. And it was a political arranged marriage because they wanted to establish trade between the two countries and they wanted to establish peace between the two countries. And so Ahab broke God's law just like Solomon had before and just like many had before. And he married a woman outside of his Jewish people. He married Jezebel. Now Jezebel, she's a much stronger woman than Ahab is a man. Ahab is going to be king, but Jezebel, don't ever doubt it, she was the woman that was in charge. She was the man in charge because she was much more of a man in many ways than Ahab was. When Jezebel shows up, she brings her kingdom's gods with her. They worshiped a god by the name of Baal. Baal was the god of fertility, the god of agriculture, the god of rain. And along with Baal came the worship of his mother, the pagan goddess Asherah. And when Jezebel became part of the Israelite kingdom in the north, she determined that she was going to cause everybody to forget about the one true God, Jehovah. And she nationalized the worship of Baal and of his mother, Asherah, of which God's people had been prevented and been prohibited from worshiping pagan idol gods because they would worship those false gods and those idols in some of the most immoral, some of the most wicked, ritualistic ceremonies that would cause all of us to blush if we talked about it. And so it's in that context that Elijah shows up as there's a new nationalized pagan religion, the worship of Jehovah alongside the worship of Baal and Asherah. And then that's when, onto the pages of history, we read this. Now Elijah, the Tishbite from Tishbe in Gilead, said to Ahab, this is how we're thrown in. As the Lord, the God of Israel lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years except at my word. And this is exactly how we are abruptly introduced to Elijah in the scriptures. He comes out of nowhere. We know where he comes from, but we don't know anything about his life before this. We don't know anything about his parents. We know nothing about this guy other than what we can infer, that he has this incredible sense of faith in God, that he has this incredible sense of loyalty to God, that he is burdened by his nation and its behavior towards God, Jehovah. And so he shows up. You talk about, he walks into the courts of Ahab, the most powerful man in the kingdom, and was still in his spine. He looks the king eye to eye and he says, okay, I got news for you, King Ahab. It is not going to rain in this land until I say it's going to rain. I have prayed that God shut up the heavens. That's what happened, and it's not going to rain until I say so. Now, it takes a little bit of courage to get up here and say some of the things that I say from time to time are just stupidity, one or the other. It could go either way. But to go before the king and declare that it's not going to rain, except at your word, you got to know what you're talking about. You got to know that you've heard from God. You got to know that you've got clear marching orders and that it's not foggy, that you go in there because if it rains tomorrow, your credibility is shot. If it rains next month, your credibility is shot. He says, Ahab, it's not going to rain. And this was a direct punch in the face at Baal, their false god, because he was the god of rain, the god of fertility. It was an agricultural type of society. It was farm to table. And if there wasn't rain, there was nothing to farm. If there was nothing to farm, there was no food. And if there was no food in time, there would be death. And so this was a message of death. It's not going to rain until I say so. Boom. And then God tells Elijah, Elijah, get out. Get out of there. Get out there right now. I'm going to put you in the witness protection program. I'm serious. You got to read your Bible. It's incredible. He tells Elijah, here's where I want you to go. I want you to go to this place called Cherith, because at Cherith, I've got a brook there waiting for you. And it's clear, it's crisp, it's cold water. You're going to drink from that brook. And Elijah, while you're at Cherith, this is going to be pretty cool. I'm pretty proud about this, Elijah. I'm going to send some ravens, right? Even though the law says they're unclean, I'm God and do what I want to do. Don't let anybody call unclean what I've called clean. So I'm going to send some ravens. They're going to drop some food from the sky for you to eat. And that's what Elijah did. He went to Cherith, and he drank from the brook, and he was fed meat from ravens who dropped it on him from the sky. Isn't that awesome? Anything like that ever happened to you? Let me tell you about you. Raven drop you from some food from the sky, you won't eat it. Right? You'd be like, no. So he goes there, and just imagine, there's a famine in the land. Things are drying up, and drying up fast in that arid Palestinian climate. But here he's got a brook, and birds drop him food. He's comfortable, and it's a good place to be until it wasn't. How many of you have been in a good place, an enjoyable place, an exciting place, a place where it was like, thank you, God? And it was a good place until it wasn't a good place. Because the scriptures say that sometime later, we don't know how long, but sometime later, the brook dried up because there had been no rain in the land. Now, the language gives us the idea that this took some time. Maybe it wasn't even noticeable at first by Elijah. He didn't even notice that the brook was flowing a little slower, and perhaps it was growing more shallow. But then all of a sudden he noticed that it wasn't like it used to be. This is just not like it used to be. I feel like it was better. I feel like there was more. I feel like, I don't know, something's different. Something's changing. I don't know. This is just not like it used to be. Until it dawned on him. Oh, my word. The water's drying up. And all of a sudden, this begins to be a very uncomfortable place to be. As a matter of fact, the word cherith in the Hebrew language means to cut off and to cut down. To cut off and to cut down. And God is taking Elijah and putting him in a very particular place to cut him off and cut him down to teach him some lessons. Someone said that it is doubtful that God can use any man or woman greatly until he has hurt them deeply. And perhaps that's what's going on. He's being cut off and he's being cut down, and he's being taught a lesson. There's some things that God wants to teach Elijah, some things that God wants to teach us about what's going on at Cherith. And pretty soon, the brook dries up. And knowing that Elijah's just like us, because that's what the New Testament says, he would think some of the thoughts that you and I would think, because once the brook went dry, we've already been stressed, we've already been anxious, we didn't know how we're going to make it once the brook dried up, and then one day there was no water, and he's thinking, God, have you forgotten me? You told me to come here, but now there's no water, so what's the deal? God, I've not heard from you again. And it begins to be very uncomfortable for Elijah. And I think some of the lessons for you and for me and for Elijah that he learned at Cherith, one of them was that God's protection often comes through our obedience. He had gone to Cherith because God told him to go to Cherith. And because he obeyed God's word, he had been protected at Cherith. He's still protected at Cherith, even though he's uncomfortable, even though he's growing more anxious by the day. Some of us, we regard what God has told us to do. We feel it is restrictive, not protective. When God says manage your money in a particular way, it feels restrictive, so you don't do what God says, and then your brook dries up. But sometimes we don't realize that what God has said to do is not about being restrictive, it's about being protective. And the reason God says do this and don't do that, it's not about restriction, it's about protection. And oftentimes, when we obey, that's God's way of protecting us, because he has told us what to do in order to protect us from something. And so, obedience in your life, obedience in my life, can serve as the conduit through which God brings his protection in our lives. Then I think another lesson is this, that sometimes the present circumstance that we are in is an answer to a past prayer. Now tell me, think about this for a moment. Why did the brook dry up? Because somebody prayed for a famine in the land. Who prayed for the famine in the land? Elijah. Now who is under the hurt of the famine? Elijah. He prayed for this. He prayed that the water would be shut off in heaven. It was shut off in heaven, and now his brook is dry. Some of you, because I have been there, and you have, and you may be there now, we get in a circumstance that's so stressful. We get in a situation that's so tight that we feel like we can hardly breathe. That we're just all the time wondering, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? What are we going to do? And perhaps, maybe, just maybe, that you're going through that because once upon a time you prayed for God to draw you close. Maybe once upon a time you prayed for God to get your attention, for God to keep you focused, for God not to let you wonder. Maybe once upon a time you prayed for God to do something in you that was special. And maybe you are where you are right now, going through what you're going through right now because of a past prayer you prayed. And it's uncomfortable, and it's a bit painful because God's trying to do what you ask him to do. And in this moment, God's trying to teach Elijah, you better keep your eyes on me. Don't you look at the brook that's drying up. Don't you look for the ravens. Keep your eyes on me. I think he's trying to teach us and Elijah that sometimes God guides by what he doesn't provide. You hear preachers get up and say, yeah, God guides and God provides. And where God guides, God provides. Where there's vision, there's provision, right? And just all of that stuff. And that there's a lot of truth to that. But sometimes, have you ever considered that God guides us by what he doesn't provide? The brook is drying up. And here's what we're going to find out. Maybe it's been true for you. That many times our next assignment is written at the bottom of a dried up brook. And until the brook dries up, you're never going to find out what your next assignment is. Because if the brook never dries up, you may never leave. You may never go to what's next. You may never take your next step as long as there's water in the brook. But when it gets so uncomfortable and the water dries up, perhaps at the bottom of that dried up brook, you're going to find out what comes next. And I think that's part of what Elijah is learning. That the pain of the present moment often prepares us for the future assignment. And there was a future assignment. We don't know how long he had to linger in limbo. We don't know how long he had to wrestle with God. Have you forgotten me? But he was there. And perhaps for a while. And then he gets the marching orders to go to a place called Zarephath. And God tells Elijah, this man who had a spine of steel, who stood face to face against Ahab and made this courageous declaration. A man who's been fed meat from heaven by the birds, who's been drinking from a brook in the midst of a famine until it dried up. Now God tells him, so I want you to go to Zarephath because there is a widow there that I am going to command to take care of you. Now guys, I want you to think about this for a minute. Think about being a man's man. Think about being a strong man. Think about being a masculine man. Think about all the things that go along with the way men think and how we act and how we behave. And God says, I'm going to cause a widow to have to take care of you. How humiliating. How difficult to let a widow woman take care of you when you're a strapping, rugged, leather-skinned man like Elijah. Are you kidding me? Come on. This was difficult. And so he goes to Zarephath, and he sees this widow woman, and he asks her for a drink of water, and she says, okay. And as she goes away, he said, oh, by the way, also make me some bread. I'm hungry. And she goes, okay, I'll get you the water, but let me tell you, here's the problem. I can't do that because I've only got a little bit of flour in a jar and a little bit of oil in a bottle. And here was my plan before I just met you. I was going to go home. I was going to get me some sticks. I was going to bake me and my son some bread. We were going to eat the bread, then we're going to die. That's what we had planned tonight. What you got planned? And here's what, think about the courage and the faith to say something like this to a widow woman who has a son that she is going to bake bread for the last time and they're going to die. He says, listen, let me tell you what to do. Here's what the Lord says to do. You go bake me bread first. You bring me that bread, and then you go back and you make bread with what's left. He said, because here's what the Lord told me to tell you. If you obey what I'm telling you to do, there'll never be a time that the flour won't be in the jar and the oil won't be in the bottle. Now, to say that to somebody in that set of circumstances, you're either a psychopath, a sociopath, you have no conscience, or you have such faith in God, such confidence in God, you know God's about to do something incredible to be able to say something like that in that circumstance. And so here's what the scriptures say. So she went away and did. She went away and did as Elijah had told her, so there was food every day for Elijah and for the woman and her family. Every time she went back, there was more flour in the jar and more oil in the bottle. It was a miracle. It was miraculous. It was incredible. But then something happened. Even in all of that miraculous, a tragedy struck. And the son died. And the mother is as we would expect any mother to be. She was so upset. She was so beside of herself. She couldn't make sense of it. You know, she was just so emotional. Elijah comes and takes the son away from her. And then he goes into another room. And he's upset. He doesn't know what God's doing. He's like, God, what are you up to? I don't understand. What are you trying to do? We're in the midst of a miracle here. Tragedies don't happen in the midst of a miracle. That's not the way it plays out. That's not what people get excited about. You tell them they're going to get a miracle, but in the midst of the miracle, there's going to be a tragedy. No, that's not the storyline we like. We just like the storyline. There's a miracle coming to you. Get ready for your miracle. Your miracle's right around the corner. A miracle's coming right for you. We love that one, but we don't like the idea that in your miracle, there's going to be a tragedy. It's going to be so painful, it's going to rip your heart out. Her son dies, and he takes the son into the other room, and we're introduced to just so many things in this moment. We're introduced, one, that God's trying to teach us that sometimes the miracle, whatever the miracle is, that the miracle is waiting on the other side of our obedience. That here's a woman who met a stranger who did what the Lord told her to do, and it was on the other side that she experienced a miracle with her flour and oil. Some of us, we just expect the miracle without any skin in the game. We just want a miracle. We just want the supernatural. We want God to show up and God to show off, and we want God to change it, and we want God to take it away, and we want God to reverse all these bad decisions. But perhaps sometimes the miraculous, the miracle is over on the other side of our obedience. She did what he told her to do, and that's when the miracle happened. But yet in the miracle, here's this tragedy, and we're introduced to, and we bump up against this idea that sometimes faith prays unprecedented prayers. This is so interesting. Up until this point in Scripture, there's never been a resurrection. There's never been someone who died and came back to life. That's never happened. That's never been heard of. That's nowhere in the Scriptures before this point. But yet Elijah has such faith in God, such confidence in God, that he has the audacity to pray an unprecedented prayer, to pray and ask God to do something that he's never heard of God doing. And he takes the boy in the other room, and he leans over at the boy, and he prays for God to raise this boy from the dead. Now, that's one thing if you're praying that prayer sometime after because you've heard some stories. He's never heard a story about somebody dying and coming back to life. This is an unprecedented prayer. Let me ask you a question. Ask me a question. How many times have you ever prayed unprecedented prayers? You've prayed for God to do something in such a way that you've really never heard of God doing it before, and you've never heard of God doing it that way. It was just such a bold, audacious confidence in God that led you to say, God, I believe you can. I don't even know if you will, but I'm going to ask you to do this. This is crazy. I'd be embarrassed if anybody found out about this. How many prayers have you prayed recently that you'd be embarrassed over if somebody heard about it? Thinking, you're an idiot. It's never going to happen. It's impossible. He prayed unprecedented prayer. God raised him from the dead, and God did. He takes him back and gives him back to the mother. And we're reminded, when you pray little prayers, don't be surprised to see little happening. You pray little prayers. There may not be anything too exciting going on. There may not be anything too invigorating going on, too inspiring going on. Pray little bitty prayers, safe prayers. You know why many of us pray safe prayers? We don't want to be disappointed. In the back of our mind, we don't want to be disappointed. We don't want to pray for God to do that because chances are God won't, and I don't want to be disappointed by it, so I don't ask. Do you pray safe? You pray big prayers, unprecedented prayers. That was Elijah's such confidence. He goes through difficulty, and God's still teaching him. And then it was time. 3 years have gone by. Boom. But it seemed just like a moment. And then we're introduced to a place called Mount Carmel. And this is where like the storyline just kicks into high gear. This is where it just all takes off, because Elijah goes back to Ahab and says, Ahab, here's what I want you to do. I want you to get the 450 prophets of Baal. I want you to get the 400 prophets of Asherah. I want you to get them together. Tell them I'm going to meet them up there on Friday at Mount Carmel. We're going to see whose God is God. And all of a sudden the word started breaking out. You know, remember back in middle school and high school, and somebody said, hey, I'm going to be meeting John 3 o'clock at the lockers. John, I've been looking for you. Well, I'll see you at 3 o'clock at the lockers, right? And then not only does John and the guys been looking for him, I don't know where John was lost, but, you know, he'd been looking for him. And then at 3 o'clock, it's just not him and the other guy who show up at the lockers. Who shows up at the lockers? Everybody shows up at the lockers. Everybody wants to see a good fight. So everybody shows up at Carmel. And there they are, 850 prophets of Baal and Asherah and Elijah. And Elijah looks at all the people who've gathered and he says, okay, here it is. Today, we're going to find out who's God. We're going to find out if Baal is God or Jehovah is God. So I'm going to ask you people a question. How long are you going to be between two opinions? How long are you going to try to serve God and idols all at the same time? If Jehovah be God, serve him. If Baal be God, serve Baal. But don't try to play both sides anymore, because today we're going to find out who's God. So Elijah, he threw the gauntlet down. He told the false prophets of Baal, he said, take a bull, cut it up, put it on your altar. Put wood all around it. Then I want you to ask Baal to consume that sacrifice by fire. And so those false prophets, they were out there, and it tells us that they were shouting, that they were dancing. They had ecstatic languages. And they were just going through all of their rituals, and nothing happened, and nothing happened, and nothing happened. They started early in the morning. Closer they got to noon, it says, as their custom was, they started just cutting themselves. And they were trying to solicit some response from their God. And here's how I know Elijah was like us, or at least like me and some of you, because I know some of you. He was a smart aleck. He's sitting over there, and it says that Elijah looks at him and says, point of order. Maybe you should just yell louder. Maybe he can't hear. Maybe he has a cold. Maybe he's caught up in a problem-solving thing, and he's thinking and he's distracted. Just yell and dance a little louder, a little harder. And he's taunting them. And finally, he says, all right, get out of the way. He takes a bull, cuts it in pieces, takes 12 stones, builds an altar, puts that bull up there, puts wood around it, digs a trench around the altar, has them douse on 3 different occasions to sacrifice the altar with water, so much so that the trench around it filled with water. And then Elijah, you know the story. He steps up, he prays. Fire falls from heaven. The sacrifice is consumed. People fall to their knees, knowing that the one true God, Jehovah, he is God and God alone. And it was a big win. It was public. It was awesome. It was flashy. It was incredible. But it was really just one part of this bigger story, and this is where we're gonna end it. Because at that moment when Mount Carmel falls in the favor of Elijah, and there's a little cloud out there on the horizon that's gonna turn into a rainstorm, and the famine's gonna come to an end. All of a sudden, things shift, and it says, now Ahab, who is trying to get back to Jezreel to tell Jezebel, he goes back to Jezebel and tells her everything that Elijah had done and how he killed all the prophets with the sword. It says, so Jezebel sent a message to Elijah to say, may the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them. And you would expect Elijah at this point to be like, come on, woman. I ain't moving. Where are you at? Right, we would expect that. A man like Elijah, everything he's been through, fed by ravens, a brook in the midst of a famine. He's raised a guy from the dead. He saw the jar never diminish a flour, nor the bottle of oil. But it says that Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. That doesn't even make sense. Nor does it when you respond and I respond in like manner. After God has done one thing after the other, after the other, after the other, that just out of the blue, with no seemingly explanation at all, we're struck with fear and we run away. It says that when he came to Beersheba in Judah, that's the southernmost part of where he could go, he left his servant there. Now he's alone. He's alone. It says, while he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, he came to a broom bush, sat down under it, and then listened to this mighty hero, this prophet of God, and he prayed that he might die. He prayed that he might die. He's suicidal. He doesn't see a reason for living. Hero? I've had enough. I can't take it anymore. I just want us to be like, you know what me and you would be like, time out. Had enough of what? Enough of the miraculous? Enough of God showing up and showing off every time you need him to do that? What? Had enough of what? There's one woman who says she's coming after you. Take my life. I'm no better than my ancestors. Again, time out. Who said you had to be? Who said you had to be better than them? Who said you had to be like them? Who said you had to do it like them? So he goes to sleep because he's fearful, he's fatigued, he's tired. Because when you get tired, everything gets fuzzy. You lose control of your emotions. Things happen physiologically, mentally. So he sleeps. Then an angel shows up and says, Elijah, you need to eat. You need to eat. You're exhausted. You're tired. You're not taking care of yourself. You've been running on adrenaline. You have hit empty. Get up and eat. Get up and eat. Get up and eat. God didn't reprimand him. God didn't slap him around. God just said, come on, man. Have a meal. Have a meal. It says, so he got up and he ate and drank. Strengthened by that food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God, the place where Moses climbed to receive the law, the place where God sat down with lightning and thundering, the place where Moses said, God, show me your glory. And God says, no, I can't show you my glory, but I'll walk by and let you see my hinder parts. That mountain, that storied, sacred place. And Elijah's running to the mountain of God. He runs inside of a cave, depressed and tired, and doesn't feel like a hero. And if we'd been there, we wouldn't say that he looked like a hero, or he sounded like a hero, or he thought like a hero, or he spoke like a hero. And God asks him, what are you doing here? Elijah, what are you doing here? This is a profound question. What are you doing here? Because God wanted him to realize the profound answer to that question. What are you doing here? What's going on? And Elijah, it's almost like he had this rehearsed. He says, I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. In case you didn't know God. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. And then listen to this. Oh, this is so telling. I am the only one left. And now they're trying to kill me too. Because anytime you get to the place where you think you're the only one, you're the only one who gets it, the only one who sees it, the only one who hears it, the only one who can, the only one who will. You can go back and read it in chapter 18, 1 Kings 18. He said the very same thing on Mount Carmel. I am the only one of the prophets of God left. He's been a bit confused about how he saw himself and about how he understood about how he fit in to this plan of God. And this is how he feels. And I just want to tell you what I need to be reminded of so often. How I feel and how you feel is not always an accurate representation of what's real. Just because you feel it doesn't make it real. Just because you think it doesn't make it real. Have you ever thought somebody was mad at you until you found out they weren't mad at you? But you were convinced they were mad at you until you found out they weren't mad at you? And you create scenarios and you create circumstances and you create a false reality in your head. You're tired, you're frustrated, you're discouraged. And now things, because you're discouraged, that didn't used to matter, now they matter. And God says, Elijah, what are you doing here? And God sent an earthquake. But Elijah didn't budge because God wasn't in the earthquake. And then God sent fire, but Elijah didn't budge because God wasn't in the fire. But then there was a whisper, a small, still voice that called to Elijah. And he stepped out of that cave because God was in the whisper. It's not always the flashy. It's not always the dramatic. And he said, Elijah, what are you doing here? And for the first time, Elijah realizes the answer. Nothing. I'm not doing anything here. I've run away. I retreated from a defeated enemy. I'm doing nothing. I'm doing nothing. And God said, it's time to get busy. I've got 2 kings I need you to anoint, and I've got a young prophet that I need you to call into service. So get busy. You're not done yet. Stop feeling sorry for yourself. Quit licking your wounds. You fell down. Heroes fall down, Elijah. But let me tell you what heroes do. They get back up. So get back up. Dust yourself off. Get back in the saddle and go after it. Because that's what heroes do. It's great. It's bad. It's messy. And you're going to fall down and you're going to get hurt. And you're going to do some silly things and you're going to think some silly things. But you got to get up and you got to get busy because God's not finished with you yet. And before you go, I want to set the record straight, Elijah. I reserved 7,000 in Israel, just so you know, whose knees have not bowed down to Baal, whose mouths have not kissed him. Elijah, you feel like you're the only one? You're not the only one. I got 7,000. Many of them were impacted by your ministry. So don't tell me you've not been doing anything. Don't tell me you've been not getting anything done. You may not feel like you've been doing anything. You've been doing something. There's 7,000. So Elijah, let me tell you what you need to know before you go. And let me tell you what you need to know before you go. You may have to be the lone one standing, but you will never be the one who has to stand alone. Elijah thought he stood alone the whole time. He thought he was alone at Cherith. He thought he was alone at Zarephath. He thought he was alone on Carmel. He thought he was alone at the mountain of God. But there were 7,000 who were trucking right along with him. But more than that, God had been with him the whole way. There's only one who's ever been alone, and his name was Jesus. And he stood in the place alone that no one else could stand in so that you would never have to walk alone. So if you've fallen down, get back up. There's a hero inside of you, and you need to get busy, and you need to quit feeling sorry for yourself. And you need to quit listening to the voices that are not real inside your head. And you need to accept the reality of what God says. You're not alone. You're not in this by yourself. So come on, get in, get busy, get with it. I'm not finished with you yet. Father, speak to our hearts. If we've fallen down, help us to get back up. If we're feeling sorry for ourselves, help us just to dust off ourselves and get back in there. We're going to get beat up. We're going to get bruised. Heroes get wounded. Heroes get it wrong. There's good days. There's bad days. There's going half mad days. In all the midst of it, God, help us to realize there's a hero inside of us. You're not done with us yet. With all of our heads bowed and all of our eyes closed, would you just whisper a prayer and say, God, thank you for not being finished with me yet. And ask God to speak to your heart with our heads bowed, eyes closed, about what your next step should be. Maybe the voices that you've been listening to. Maybe rehearse where you've been in the past, how God showed up, and how you realize you've never had to be alone. You never will. Don't be fearful of what's happening today. Trust that God's in control. God, speak to us.